Some other big news, not official yet, but it looks like it could be any day now. The Observer and PW Insider both reporting that NXT is likely headed to television, but not to Fox Sports 1, like we all expected and had been believed, but rather to the USA Network. And again, an announcement could be coming as early as tomorrow, possibly by the time some of you listen to this. That per the WrestleVotes account on Twitter, which has been accurate with some reports before. The belief is that NXT... So let's back up a little bit here, because I already got comments from people on the video that I had put up last week when I took the clip from the show and put it on YouTube, talking about NXT possibly moving to FS1, and people joking, haha, Meltzer wrong again, it's not going to FS1, it's going to USA. All I'll say is this, you can laugh and mock all you want to, and Dave can defend himself. He's not always right, but, the details are still the same. It's not like it's some bogus report that was completely fabricated. The belief is the show is going to be 2 hours, which I believe he also reported, every Wednesday from 8 to 10 p.m., which means it would be directly competing with AEW on TNT, and that the premiere date is likely to be sometime in advance of October 2nd, which is when AEW launches on TNT. So I guess they would be doing that to get the jump on AEW. There's no other explanation for why they would do that. The show would be live on at least some weeks. More likely it would be live every week and would remain at Full Sail University. So if you are one of these people hoping that they get out of Full Sail or they move around, I guess they could always move around a few times a year, but it doesn't sound like that's the plan. Full Sail would still be their base and where they would base the show out of every single week. This would not be the first time that NXT has aired on USA. There was one episode that aired 2 years ago as part of an entire week of WWE programming. I think it was in December, probably heading into the holidays. And I looked it up how it did. It did about 840,000 overnight viewers, which was good at the time for number 22 on all of cable television. So that's the only frame of reference we have for how NXT may do on the USA Network, or on any network, really. Because we don't get those kinds of stats and numbers from the showings on the network, although NXT is supposedly consistently the highest viewed thing on the entire network. Which begs the question, what happens now? Do you maintain a separate NXT show on the WWE Network? Or are you taking away from the network one of the big draws for a lot of people? Are there going to be people who go ahead and cancel their network subscription because of this? Because not everybody is into the classic content. And I mean, someone like me, not that I have time to watch all the stuff on there that I want to, but when I hear, like I just read something about tomorrow, for example, on Monday, there's a big classic dump of content, happening with the network where they're adding another 20 episodes of WCW Saturday Night from 1993. This is in addition to the episodes from 93 that they had previously uploaded. I love hearing stuff like that. Now, am I going to sit here and go through all 20 episodes of Saturday Night? Probably not. But I like the idea that I can bring up the old stuff anytime I want to and catch up with it. So I'm all about the classic stuff, but not everybody is. There are some people and newer fans who just watch the network to watch NXT and, some of the original shows like Table for Three and Ride Along and, the 365 documentaries, which were very well done, and the pay-per-views. And that's it. And if you take NXT away, that's reason enough for some people to say, you know what, I'm not renewing. So that'll be interesting as well. I would have to think they maintain some kind of NXT presence on the network, or maybe just keep the 1 hour show and just add a 2 hour show on TV. Now you get 3 hours of NXT every week. That's sort of it's almost like a backdoor way of getting to 3 hours of NXT. Like we have 3 hours of Monday Night Raw, and people wonder why I think this is all just overkill. And why I worry about stuff like this. But, Brian Alvarez noted that he was told there was a meeting on Friday morning, I believe, with a number of NXT talents where they were specifically told that NXT, flat out, was moving to USA. PW Insider says there are those within the company who believe it's already a done deal, and it's just a matter of announcing it. The next scheduled taping, they just had a taping this week. The next taping is scheduled, I believe, for September 11th. So that could be the earliest day if they wanted to take the show live on TV that they can do so. But they said, something similar in that people who work at Full Sail have been told to prepare for a longer show. And this is really the worst thing as a fan of the current format that I could hear. Because the idea of expanding the show is just something that is not at all appetizing to me. As much as I like NXT. This is not something that I find appealing at all. I think that they are treading on dangerous ground here. You know, and I get it. Oh, we want to grow NXT. This is the next logical step to grow NXT. You put it on television. You go live. I'm not against that. But the idea that it has to be expanded. I'm just not a fan of this idea. So, but, you know, and I know some of you are going to love it. Hey, great, more NXT. But more is not always better. So we have to just wait and see. I'm not going to condemn anything, you know, until I see it. I'm just voicing my concern. As far as the NXT versus AEW element is concerned, it's why this is happening now. Of course it is. You'd be a fool to think otherwise. And that's wrestling. That's wrestling. AEW, you know, they've poked the bear a few times, sometimes in good fun. Well, the bear pokes back. And it's up to them now to give people a reason to want to watch their show live and not on DVR. And make people watch NXT later. Or maybe just not watch NXT at all. It really would be the closest thing, you know, that little failed Impact experiment aside from 2010. This would be the closest thing to what we had 20 years ago when people were flipping back and forth between Raw and Nitro. Now, the numbers are not going to be the same. You're not going to have 10 or 11 million people combined watching pro wrestling on a Wednesday night like you did back then at their peak. But again, this would be the closest thing to that. And who knows, maybe it spurs both parties on to do better and try some things that maybe otherwise they wouldn't try. And it's going to make the shows more exciting, and the fans are the big winners in the end. But there's no doubt that, you know, if and when this happens, this is going to sting AEW. At least a little bit. If they're trying right out of the gate to pop a big number and impress TNT and kind of rope in as many fans as they possibly can, you know, and pop a big number and everything on October 2nd, and then WWE turns around and they load up that NXT show on October 2nd and maybe October 9th and October 16th, and they put together some big matches or a big debut, or, you know, they bring in some main roster names, which I don't doubt that they would do whether AEW is around or not. If they're putting NXT on television, they're going to want to make sure it's a success. How do you do that? Well, you bring in some names from the main roster. At least the first few weeks. AEW or no AEW, I think they would be doing that anyway. It's kind of like Main Event. Remember when they brought back Main Event? I mean, Main Event used to be this one-off special that they would do. They did it in 88. They did it... I'm sorry, did they do it in 88? No, I don't think they did. They did it... Well, maybe they did. I'm not sure now. I know they did a Main Event special in 89. That was the one where the Mega Powers split. The following year in 90, they did another Main Event special. It was Hogan against the Macho King, and Buster Douglas was there. It was going to be Mike Tyson. Tyson got knocked out. He bailed, so they brought in Buster Douglas. And Buster Douglas threw a punch at the end at Randy Savage that didn't connect, and Savage was smart enough to go hit me again, and so he punched him again. And so anyway, that aside, when they debuted this Main Event show in 2012, I'm almost positive, I think the Main Event, on that first episode, might have had CM Punk against Sheamus, and this would have been when CM Punk was WWE Champion. So I think those first few shows, they loaded it up in a way, a little bit. They wanted people to think, oh, this new show is a big deal. It's going to have some big names on there. It wasn't but more than a few weeks before it settled into the format that you expected it to have, which is that it was a C-level show in the pecking order. And it's still around, and now you'll see people like Zack Ryder and Kurt Hawkins and Apollo Crews and Dana Brooke. And no offense to any of them, but they're the C-string of WWE. And that's what Main Event has become. So I'm sure they don't want NXT to become that, and NXT has a lot of names that the mainstream audience may not recognize. So yes, I would be stunned if they don't have people like an AJ Styles or a Daniel Bryan or some other main roster names on at least those first few episodes if they go to USA. Names that the USA audience would recognize. I'm sure that's going to work against AEW, and they're going to have to just work that much harder to convince people, hey, you know, watch what we're doing. We're putting on a better show. And it could be fun for the fans. But I'll speak for myself here. I'm also spread so damn thin with all of this wrestling these days. You know, back then, for me anyway, it was Raw and Nitro. That was it. And then SmackDown eventually got introduced on UPN. But wrestling was so hot at the time, and I was younger, and it was kind of the hip thing, and wrestling was in vogue, and, you know, you wanted more wrestling back then. I would have killed as a wrestling fan back in 97, 98 to have a 24-hour wrestling channel like we have now with WWE Network. Are you kidding me? I would never have left the house. But now it's like, you know, you've got all of these different promotions and all of these different shows just from WWE alone. Forget AEW and MLW and everything else. And it's too much. But back then it was Raw and Nitro. Maybe I would check out ECW late at night on the weekend. It was on at 3 a.m., you know, if I happened to flip over from some Shannon Tweed movie on Cinemax. But that was my wrestling fix. You know, now you got to keep up with 3 hours of Raw and 2 hours of SmackDown. Now NXT, which was always an easy watch, goes to 2 hours. Then you got 2 hours of AEW. That doesn't leave time for much else. And at what point do you just get burned out by it all?